Earth, a Love Story, written and read by Robin Lassiter. Chapter 9. It is universally true that the renegotiation of trauma is an inherently mythic, poetic, heroic journey. Peter Levine. And now a word from my trauma. I'm back in my childhood valley, and don't get me wrong, it's great. I'd come so far. I'd listened to my banished self as she returned to me. I paid the ferryman. I returned home. I am alive, vibrant, daring again to hope for ease and peace after all the years of confusion and pain. My mind is clear, ready. My body, though, my body. Every now and then, more often than I'm comfortable with, I still experience a throat-closing fear that locks me inside of myself, or makes me lash out, or makes me jump in my truck and drive until I'm exhausted. Even though I'm so aware of all of my personal pitfalls, and even though I work really hard to manage them and sidestep the landmines and maintain my lane and make sure that I'm doing all of the work to keep things on the rails, I see these old patterns start to creep back in, and that utterly terrifies me. My sin eater is not yet sleeping contented at my feet, but instead pacing, watchful in the background, waiting to jump in and take over if things get too dicey. She knows how to rescue me from me, and she won't take any chances. I've undergone a 1.5 years of therapy, tackled my codependency issues, enjoyed continued sobriety, and have literally come home. Yet my body still holds the memory of trauma, and it is affecting my life. I've diligently done meditation and yoga on it, journaled on it, slept on it, ignored it, prayed on it, tried to walk, run, sweat it out of me, and still, when my body feels unsafe, it reacts with a fight or flight, flop sweat, activated nervous system vigilance, and the smallest thing can trigger it. A word, a look, a hint of judgment from another, a loneliness, a nightmare. I am constantly formulating a plan for what needs to happen next. I relentlessly search out a policy to put a system in place that will finally manage all of this. Nothing works. I was alone through so much of my journey. It happened inside of me, in the interior, in that place that much of the world gives little or no credence, so I didn't either. I couldn't explain it to people. I'd just survived it. I'd gone down into the darkness and made it back up. Now what? I think part of me figured that I'd reached the climax of my story, that once I'd faced my deepest terror, once I'd turned toward my own pain, toward the parts of myself I'd exiled, and once I'd invited them back in, that was it. Figured out, done, winner. Turns out not. Instead, what I learned in the dome that day in Hawaii, watching my pain swirl across the room from me and ultimately allowing it to shatter me open, was not the climax of my story after all. It was a doorway, as Eve Ensler says, at the very center of my wound. What I gained there was the courage to walk through that door and find the path continuing on the other side. I faced the thing that should have killed me. I died and didn't die. I was no longer a hollow ghost. I'd turned into a real person, flesh and blood and spine. But I hadn't yet been put to the real test, where the rubber meets the road out in the world. I'd survived, but I wasn't done. I talked to Jacob about it, and he recommends that I find someone local to do EMDR therapy. Even though my rational mind knows that I'm safe, that nothing is wrong, that things are going really well, my body and nervous system are still on guard, still suspicious, still afraid. So I take the advice of my therapist and of Ralph Waldo Emerson, who says, "Throw your body at the mark when your arrows are spent." Emerson was talking about how to be a writer, but it applies so perfectly to my situation that I co-opt it and use it to keep myself sighted in at the target. The closest therapist that I can find is in the nearest real city, 80 miles away, and I commit to whatever EMDR is and commit to addressing these patterns that are still embedded inside of me. Every Thursday morning, I wake up at 6, which is just enough time for me to throw on some clothes and make a to-go cup of coffee and drive the hour and 15 minutes to be at my EMDR session by 8 o'clock. I love the drive. I love the early morning stillness and time to myself. I love the charged up nervous energy thinking about what might come up during therapy. I arrive a little early and it's late spring, so the trees on the wide, quiet street in front of my therapist's office are loaded with pink and white flowers. The morning is beautiful, cool, and sweet. I'm sweating. I go inside at the appropriate time and meet my new therapist. She's, 11. She's dressed in grown-up pants and a silky top, and I feel out of place in the yoga uniform that I adopted in Hawaii and can't seem to move on from. She sits up straight in an oversized chair, and I slouch into the corner of a couch, and we both clasp our hands in our laps. She starts to talk, and I realize that, okay, maybe she's about 25, and she's really smart and caring, and I like her. But this is why with my therapist in Hawaii, we'd done a just the facts ma'am kind of therapy together, where he was the expert and I learned what healthy relationships look like and how people act in them, and then tried to do that. I really didn't want this compassionate look that was on her face. I didn't want to see her empathy for me, because that would validate how shitty it had all been for all of those years, and then I'd have to admit it. Samantha creates a container of boundaries and expectations for our work together. She explains about EMDR and how I'll start by telling her how anxious or upset or freaked out or afraid I feel on a scale of 1 to 10, and then we'll do this bilateral stimulation thing. My eyes following her fingers left to right, ticking back and forth like that black and white cat clock. And then we'll check in again and continue on to the next thing that makes me feel like I'm drowning, and repeat. So, having spent all of my arrows, I throw my body at the mark. Literally. Every Thursday morning for 8 weeks, I repeat the 80-mile drive and, on purpose, trigger my nervous system into anxiety bordering on panic. I feel like I will float away. I get flop sweats and shallow breath and lightheaded and face the things that I'd done and that had been done to me. Until I did that work, I really hadn't taken the time to think back through the events of my life, especially the things that had happened in my late teens and 20s when everything was a big kaleidoscope of flashing people and towns and repeating hangovers and parties and the heights and depths of all that had happened then. EMDR helped me integrate those experiences in a new way. My brain was hungry for a new path to take, and with Samantha guiding me, my looping thoughts jumped the well-worn neural tracks and headed off into the terrain of new possibilities, or some kind of magic like that. I don't know how it works exactly, but it did, and it was life-changing. Those weeks were like another movie montage training scene. I was Neo, downloading kung fu directly into his brain, eyes rolled back and twitching. I wanted more. I wanted to get through all of it. On week 5, though, I hit a wall. We'd sped through so much. Now, in the middle of this process, it dawns on me that, I'd been sexually abused multiple times from the age of about 16 on. You remember the 90s, right? And I'd been physically and verbally abused in several close relationships, and I'd spent over 20 years addicted to and abusing one substance or another. I'd done so much damage to myself and to people that I'd loved. I'm codependent and a college dropout. I see ghosts and float out of my bed at night. I hear voices and purple spheres talk to me, and I walk around inside panther skins. I don't have any kids, and I'm 40, so, Those last few seconds on my biological clock are ticking away. It's a lot. I'd lived it, but to suddenly have perspective on it, to be able to look at it from a distance and see it all sitting there, was a shock to my system. This all culminated in week 5 and I got through it, but for the rest of that week I felt shaky and detached from myself. I felt nervous and suspicious and that old familiar half in, half out of my body feeling that comes with panic attacks. Week 6 came and I couldn't do the EMDR. I couldn't go through any more of the traumatic memories. Instead, I sat down and, my throat burning and cramped from holding back emotion, I asked Samantha if maybe we could just talk. Much of what we had done together so far was relatively internal. I'd been in my head, revisiting the trauma, processing a lot. She'd been talking me through it, guiding and leading. Today was different. I told her details about the things I'd experienced. It was so many years, I really just wanted love and beauty and goodness, but it was all dark and confusing. So many things happened so fast. I didn't know how to control any of it. I didn't know what to do with it. I was just sure it was all my fault and I couldn't stop any of it. I didn't know how. I couldn't stop the things that happened to me, and I couldn't stop myself from doing horrible things. I peered at Samantha with a wadded tissue over my mouth and my body convulsed. I waited fearfully for her to respond to what I said. She spoke quietly while her soft brown eyes looked directly into me. "It hurt," she said. "Yes," I croaked. My body was contracted around my pain and aching from how hard I was locking my muscles to keep my grief inside. I wanted so desperately to release everything I was holding, but I didn't want to make her have to witness it. "I hurt so many people," I said, "and I let so many people hurt me. I hurt myself." Samantha held my gaze and tilted her head ever so slightly, and her mouth tightened with emotion, and her empathetic feminine brows crumpled, and her eyes got shiny with tears, and that brought me over the edge. I couldn't hold it all anymore. When I saw her see me, a long, high wail emanated from deep within my body that I couldn't control. I sobbed, and with every racking shudder, I released more grief, and everything that had been held behind the veneer of "it's not that bad" came gushing out. I couldn't manage it anymore, couldn't keep it together, couldn't pretend. I couldn't present a version of myself to her for her approval so that I could earn my safety. I was naked and unarmored in front of another person for maybe the first time ever. I surrendered in the face of the depth of my grief, and I broke. Samantha was fully present, bearing my pain with me. This time, instead of my own banished, fractured self rushing across the room to be integrated back into me, a thick, silvery wave of compassion floated out from her and gently touched my raw, red pain in the center of the room between us. Samantha held my vulnerability with such tenderness that it broke me open even more. She silently witnessed me and silently grieved with me. It was a potent, unexpected, alchemical medicine, and one of the biggest gifts that I've ever received from another human being. I drove home after that week 6 session, exhausted. I called in sick to work and climbed into bed and stayed there for 36 hours. I had done so much on my own. I'd managed everything. I'd cried behind closed doors. I'd beaten myself up, hated myself, condemned myself. And when that didn't work, when I learned that I could never hate myself enough to become someone I could love, I'd learned to extend myself compassion, allowance, and care. I'd picked myself up and tried again, and again, and again. And I'd done well. I'd survived it. I had navigated it, but that only took me so far. I needed to do this work with another human being, another nervous system, space and appropriate boundaries and safety with another person. I needed the mysterious interaction that happens between vagus nerve complexes and electromagnetic fields and all of the unseen bodies emanating from our hearts and our brains, and all of the unspoken language that happens through flesh and eyes and souls. I needed someone to see me. Week 7 felt great. We spent the entire session using EMDR to anchor all of the new connections my brain was making about safety and where it comes from and what the future could be and how that could look different from the past and how it was okay to hope. During our final session, week 8, we processed everything together and did the work of setting up agreements for when I would return to therapy if X or Y or Z happened. Like if I start isolating or find myself in an abusive relationship or get depressed and can't get out or start using alcohol or drugs again. True, deep forgiveness would come later, but here was the first twinkling. Because I was able to process and integrate my own pain, I was able to access a new sense of compassion for the people in my life who had hurt me, and more difficult, for myself, for hurting other people. We are all sensitive, precious beings, and trauma rolls through the generations like thunder, whether you are the victim or the perpetrator. In trauma, we are slaves to our fear. Anger is fear, numbing is fear, clinging is fear, demanding is fear, hurting is fear, armoring is fear. We carry a multitude of individual wounds and a multitude of collective wounds. We are all just one thing, and we only hurt ourselves when we hurt another. Call it the ego, or the inner child, or the activated nervous system, the demiurge, Jung's complexes, a related group of emotionally significant ideas that are completely or partly repressed and that cause psychic conflict leading to abnormal mental states or behavior. Yeah, that pretty much says it, although it's a little reductive for me. I call her a Reshkagul. She is the great round, the uncried cry, and as terrifying as she is, this dark feminine, she also carries deep medicine and freely gives it when I have the courage to meet her down there in the depths of my own belly. My journey as a tremendously sensitive person healing from many years of trauma has brought me deep into the dark forest of self, following a feeling more than any actual pathway. Much of this journey I traversed with a helper. Beautiful therapists, coaches, teachers, and dear friends, family, and loved ones who have borne me through the darker times. Thanks, everyone. Ultimately, though, this is a solitary journey. You know, besides me and my body, my multitude of selves, and my unseen guides, helpers, and allies, my ancestors, and the source of all things everywhere and nothing anywhere. Other than that, though, totally alone. I've learned about and adopted practices around emotional intelligence, reparenting of the inner child, humanistic psychology, internal family systems integration work, NLP, heart-brain coherence, the subconscious mind, polyvagal theory, Jungian dream work, and more, I'm certain. If you're exhausted reading that, I feel you. These days I'm diving into somatics, into the divine feminine, into the maiden and mother archetypes. I am approaching something, learning to trust life herself. My teachers are many, and I sit at their feet. This work exists in the multidimensionality that all of my life seems to span. It involves flesh and blood and nervous system and neuroplasticity, the internal etheric feminine and masculine, the dream world, the integration of a fractured psyche, the unsafe selves and the cultivation of the safe self that holds them all, and the teachings I received while in alien school. It is a loving homecoming to all parts of me, especially the most neglected parts. my body, my nervous system, my divine vessel who longs to be cherished, and the wounded self who lives deep in my belly, waiting for me to be able to love her unconditionally. My question now is how to move not the earth, not the whole of humanity, but simply how to move me, myself, my own body that this life happens through, from a paradigm of evolution through suffering to evolution through joy and creativity. How is my body like humanity? How is my body like the earth? How unexpected that the farther away I try to get from all things messy and human and painful, the closer I came, full circle, the great round, to my own tender body, my own tender heart. How deep the work here in my own flesh, how softly I ache, coming home to myself, to this shared human condition. How exquisite to be reacquainted with the sensation of being alive. The good news is that it's working. All of it. All of these lenses and teachings have been helpful, and along the way, I've learned a tremendous amount about my own inner world, how my beliefs affect my reality, how the body becomes the unconscious mind, how to soothe it, and how to hold myself during the difficult moments. Let Eresh Kagel rage, in the safety of my bedroom, or in the safety of my saltwater-filled bathtub, or in the safety of wide-open nature, but always in the safety of my most expanded, most loving self. Listen to her cries, hold her, grieve with her. Let that grief break me open to joyful life. The truth is that I am unsafe when you are unsafe, and you are unsafe when I am unsafe. Only love is a big enough remedy for all of that. It's a daunting reality, but love is the only medicine there is, and I apply it liberally to myself and to everyone in my past and future, and to every stranger suffering and causing suffering. Sometimes it feels like it won't be enough, but it always is. Love forever replenishes itself, no matter how deeply we pull from the well. This work is ongoing and alive and present with me still. I am slowly, lovingly, exploring my own sacred interior, offering a balm of respect and honor to the parts of myself that still feel cast aside and separated. I am loving myself whole. And one more thing before we wrap this up. One more word from my trauma to the aliens. I know you didn't ask, but here's a tip anyway. Maybe taking an extremely sensitive being and subjecting them from childhood to horrific images of Armageddon, along with a lifetime of somatic and ontological shocks and traumas, and giving them the massive pressure of some giant vital mission, isn't the best way to mobilize an army of earth-saving light workers, or whatever the hell we're supposed to be. I know that there's this thing called post-traumatic growth, the deep transformation that can happen after trauma, because I have experienced it from the inside out. I know how powerful that is. I get it. But fuck. For more information, or to book a one-on-one session with me, visit honeyheart.org.